Hey everyone, welcome back. This is just a compilation of like 4 videos I made earlier about Atari arcade ports. It's been cut down, made a bit briefer, so the pacing is more acceptable. But if anyone wants to watch the long forms, they're still available. But here we go. Here's 44 arcade ports for the Atari. So starting off with Battlezone, and I mean this doesn't look anything obviously like the futuristic look of the one in the arcade. This is a really great looking version on the Atari, and it handles really well. And I mean, this gives you just about everything you could want out of the game. Sure, there's some purists that think the tank stick controls really were, the key to it, but I mean, it plays the same either way with the joystick or with the arcade. It's just, slightly different controls, but the feel is there. All right, next we got Mousetrap, another Exidy game. This one, it's hard to compete with the arcade because you had 3 colored buttons and different colored doors to open while you run around the maze, and then you had the changing to the dog button after you got some bones. And I do like how they were able to, if you hit the button quick, you turn into the dog if you got a bone. If you hold it for a second down, it will change your doors, so they open and close. And while you're not controlling 3 separate types of doors based on the colors, I think they were red, blue, and green colored doors. So while you just have one style of doors, it actually works pretty good on here. Now, I wish they would have done a little something extra, like change up the maze or something, just to keep it a little fresher. But they do get a little more aggressive over time, so it does get harder and harder to play. Never heard of this game before in my life. Never played it in the arcades, but it's kind of fun, and it's not exactly easy because you've got the first stage where you're just shooting the stuff in the air. And then after you finish that level, you've got this next level, which is very basic. I'm sure it gets a little more difficult as you get into higher levels. I haven't played into that, but it's just kind of like zipping through a maze. So you got to get through this cleanly, and then it goes through another round, and it just, cycles through that. Jungle Hunt, what was it, Jungle King at one time? I think there was some deal where they couldn't call it that because maybe it wasn't Jungle King, but there were several names for this. There was Jungle Hunt, Jungle King. I think there was another name out there for it. There were different versions in the arcades. A lot of arcade ports don't have all the screens, but they did. They put every screen on this. The only thing I would ask for is try and not make the rock section so hard. But you know what? It can be hard in the arcade, that rock section. But if you want one of the best arcade ports on an Atari system, you can't go wrong with Jungle Hunt. Now, this version only has 2 of the boards, and each board has 4 screens. And while this doesn't stack up to, say, something like even the ColecoVision version, with the depth that has, this is a pretty decent port. It's just a bit repetitive. Even though they did a good job on the actual games, they could have done so much better by adding additional levels, but they kind of cheaped out. But Venture, it's a pretty solid game for what it is, as long as you keep your expectations in check. All right, now here we have Vanguard, SNK game, early SNK. Yeah, that's the Neo Geo people, that's right. But this one was kind of cool because there was extra angles to it. You're doing a side-scrolling shooter, and then you're going up or down, and you had the invincibility option, and it was unique because you could shoot in all directions too. It really impressed me when they would make arcade conversions like this for the Atari that were very true to the arcade game. How does this hold up compared to the arcade? Well, there's no bear. Where you get the bear as a in-between, like, bonus stage, and he'd go by, and then there'd be more bears, and they'd turn. Well, it doesn't have that, but that's not the core of the game. So this is like 95% of the game. And while I missed that little bit with the bear, it really doesn't detract from how fun this is and how great it plays on the Atari. So Q*bert is just one of those games that I would play a little bit. I can't remember where Q*bert was most of the time. It's kind of fuzzy. I don't remember what arcade it was in. It could have been any one of the arcades in the area. And it's a lot easier to play Q*bert in the arcade because of the angle of the joystick. You're doing the diagonals. Now, it works out pretty well on the Atari because you just twist the controller and you're playing on the angles. This is another really good conversion. This is Parker Brothers too. So they were doing their very best to make good conversions, but Parker Brothers was going all out on a couple of these, and I really appreciate the quality they had on these. But again, a Q*bert, not a game I love, but a game I love having. And here we go. Here's the stinker. Here's the one that we all were so disappointed with. The sounds are horrible. The flicker's horrible. You might see there's only 2 ghosts on screen at a time because the recording of this. They'll pop up now and then, but they're all there. Trust me, they just flicker a lot. And it was just such a huge disappointment when they could have done so much better. Well, there you go. There's Pac-Man. I mean, some people love it still on Atari. Not me. I've got better ways to play, and it doesn't fill me up with any warm memories. So, all right. Next, we have just the classic Asteroids, and I mean, what's nice about this version of Asteroids is it's like the Space Invaders one, which maybe I'll cover someday, but this has tens and tens of variations. Sometimes I think it might have the shield, sometimes it has the warp. You can disappear. Plays perfectly fine, and it's got lots of color to it now. All right, so here we have Kangaroo, and this was an Atari arcade game, but what's nice is they went a little beyond the 2-screen standard that some games did, where, a lot of games had multi-screens, but they'd only do a couple like Donkey Kong did. But I can at least appreciate that they added 3 screens instead of just 2, so it gave it a little more replay value. It's a pretty decent conversion to have in the home, so I give it a thumbs up. Next, we got Zaxxon. Now, Zaxxon is famous for having that, skewed look. I don't know if that's quite isometric on this or whatnot, but also the height meters, and you got to fly through holes in the wall and stuff in the arcade, and you got to be on the same level as the characters to shoot them. It's a good effort in a way to try and encapsulate that 3D kind of feel to it, the up and down, your X, Y, Z in space and time. Just doesn't work for me. I had a hard time with this, but if you find it for $1, definitely worth picking up. All right, here we have Centipede, and this one is more than adequate. I mean, yeah, the graphics are a little bit downscaled, but the gameplay is perfect. I mean, you know what everything represents. Those are mushrooms. That's your little player down there. Another really solid arcade port on an early home console. All right, let's give Super Breakout a try. I'm going to use this one with the paddle controllers. This is my favorite mode, Mode 7. Mode 7 was kind of called the progressive mode, where the blocks would keep coming down at you, so it was never ending. The scoring is so low because each thing is only worth like 1 or 2 or 3 points, but it's wicked satisfying. There you go. It's like Breakout, but it's Super Breakout. It's got extra stuff, so that's awesome. All right, so here we have Commando, and while this is kind of a valiant effort in a way, it almost seems like they could have done better. I don't think the sprites needed to be so fully fledged on this. I would have liked more enemies popping up and better control with the shooting. It doesn't quite give you the intense action of the arcade game. So this one, while it's kind of nice for what it was, and I guess if you never actually played Commando in the arcades, you might be happy with this, knowing it's just one of these kind of run and gun kind of arcade shooters, but it's not comfortable. The pace just isn't right. The scale just doesn't feel right, and I'll have to say I'd skip this one if I were you. All right, now we're on to Crystal Castles. This one is another trackball, rollerball game, and it loses a lot of feel by not having that on the Atari 2600. It's very frustrating to get your joystick to catch the angles to get the dots that Bentley Bear has to get. I'm not saying that it's a total deal breaker, because There's a nice amount of levels in this. It changes gameplay up and keeps it fresh. And then, you get the ladders, you get the elevators. So a lot of what's in the arcade game is here. This is a little gem. So take that for what it's worth. If it's something you want to try, and again, if you never played in the arcade, you might love it. Hey, here's Super Cobra. I didn't know this existed on the Atari 2600. Hey, but here it is. I was at that Bull Moose the other day, and they had these games in the case. I don't know why they were locked away, but because they were only $2. But I'm like, Super Cobra? This is pretty smooth. I like how they designed it. You've only got one button, but they were clever enough to make it so you fire one time and then the other time is a bomb. So maybe I'm wrong and someone out there is going to be like, it's really not that good. I was like, no, it's pretty good. Man, does it get tight in some of these spots. But hey, there you go, Super Cobra. I didn't know it existed, but I'm glad it does, and now I got it. All right, here we have Donkey Kong, for better or for worse, and it's just devastating when you found out that there's only 2 levels. And it's not the programmer's fault. I mean, recently they just cleared it up where he had an interview and he was just like, look, this was the best we could do with the time we could do. And it was only because we had no time to build extra levels. They wanted it out. 2 levels, that was it. That's the storage you're getting. That's the end of the story. He could have done more levels, he said. He could have done more, but all right, here we have another game that's kind of like Commando, but if you were in the arcades, you remember Frontline had the little twisty knob, and what they did with an Atari, this is pretty impressive. What's nice about this is they even had the tank component put in there, so that was impressive. But other than that, it feels a little flat. All right, now we are at Junior Pac-Man, and I have to say, this is a late game. This was put out really late by Atari. And I have to say that this is one of my favorites. It is fast, it is furious, and it is fun. It plays really well. It's just super hard, but it's hard in a way that you want to play again and again. And once I got this, I was like, holy smokes, this could have been a big hit, especially if you compare it to the original Pac-Man. Wizard of War. And this is a great conversion to from the arcade. It's a good maze chase game. These things are very chaotic the way they move around. And once if you leave a few on screen and they get really fast, it gets super difficult to track them down. There's a lot of skill and a lot of luck in this. So it's something you can improve your gameplay, but you also have to get lucky sometimes. All right, here we have a Defender, which it's okay. It's not bad. I could see getting used to it after time. There's a lot of flicker with Defender. This being a little bit of a hectic game and the speed sometimes and flying around, it still is a darn good port. They did a good job, and you do get used to the flickering after a while, but there's a lot, so just be warned. But it's still pretty fun and hectic. All right, here we have Frogger, and not much to say about Frogger. I mean, this is Frogger. It's got the snakes, it's got the alligators, it's got the fast pace of the cars getting faster. There's also the factor of, when you go to jump into the little holes, the safe holes, sometimes there's a fly in there, alligators can pop out. And I mean, it controls really well. You're going to be 90+% happy with this game. All right, here we are. Man, I've had this on my wish list for such a long time. And when I saw this in that case at Bull Moose for $2, I was like, wait, that's Joust. Why is it only $2? Is this as good as the original Joust? I mean, no, but is it far off? Not really. It's pretty good. The other thing too is the pterodactyls in this. Now I don't get the pitchfork guy coming out of the lava dragging you in, but just the fact that it has the egg waves, it has the changing of the board, the landing, it has the pterodactyl, which I thought I killed right there, but obviously I haven't. I mean, I just want to play this for 10 hours straight until I kill a pterodactyl. So Solar Fox here is an arcade port that I discovered was an arcade port. It just sounded like one, While I thought it seemed a little mundane at first, well, as I played a little more, I found out, well, you get bonus levels too that you got to clear, which is pretty neat. So that changes it up. And then once you get up to a certain level, it kind of is like the Cubert idea where you have to go over things a couple times. I was impressed with this. I started having fun. I thought it was kind of crappy at first, but as I played it more and more, I started having a good time. And then when I was like, wow, they're making the levels harder and harder, this gets pretty exciting. Galaxian, not Galaga, which was the sequel, but Galaxian. And this is a pretty solid port, if you ask me. It gives you everything you want. I would have been thrilled to have this back in the day. So that's all I can say about it. Berserk. This is a pretty solid conversion. It really can be very intense. It can be very easy at first, or it can get very intense quick, and then you have very limited time in each room, and Evil Auto starts showing up. This still had the heart of the game in here, and you felt like you were playing Berserk. Even though the characters are a little larger, it still felt really good to play this game. Now we have Dig Dug. If you wanted to get the feeling of Dig Dug at home, I don't know if they could have done much better than they did for the Atari here. I mean, it's got everything you want. You know, you're digging through the ground. There's different levels. They change up the colors. They change the placement of the rocks. When you drop a couple of rocks, you get the fruit or vegetable that drops out. This was a really good home conversion for an Atari. I say it's worth picking up. Yeah, Bump and Jump. And Bump and Jump was an arcade game. It was a race game, but it had an extra component of you push the jump button and you can fly up in the air. You can come down, smash on your opponents. You know, you get warnings where you've got to jump over waterways and things like that. And, you know, if you jump at the wrong time, boom, you're in the water. So I don't remember everything in the original one, but this seems to have most everything. You're bumping and jumping and knocking off cars and getting bonus points. And, you know, it's got the thing where you've got the little oil tanker that dumps out stuff on you. And so, hey, there's nothing wrong with this. All right, here we have Lock and Chase. And I can tell it's kind of a Pac-Man clone. So after playing it, you'll see here at first, I'm just picking up the stuff and leaving the exits. What it is you're like a robber or something, and these are cops, and a money bag will appear on the top. The cops are pretty aggressive, so it's a good challenge. If you didn't have Pac-Man, I think you would have really enjoyed this as an option or an alternative. All right, now switching over to Circus Atari, it's just about how long you can keep these guys up in the air. You've got the mechanics of the paddle going back and forth. You've got the guys that can be, you got to make sure that they hit the teeter-totter thing there to launch each other. And then also, you can flip the teeter-totter. And depending on how many times they've jumped and on what angles, you get different angles, you get different height. So, I mean, it could just go crazy fast. It's one of those games where you don't have time to think. You're just reacting. And some of those games are the best games. Now we have the follow-up to Centipede, and that's Millipede. And the action on here is even more hectic than on Centipede. I mean, you've got the DDT bombs, which are cool. You've got the Millipede coming at you now. You got spiders. You got all kinds of other things flying down at you. Just waves and waves of stuff. It handles really well considering you're using a joystick. So they did a good job mimicking that feel of a rollerball on the Atari. The action is just crazy, nonstop, hectic. So Phoenix, I might not have played it as much because Space Invaders is okay, you know, and then everything's kind of a better version, you know, Galaga, Galaxian. And this one's a bit more frantic because at least there's like a boss character on this. You've got like a couple waves of different styles of enemies coming at you, and then you've got this boss character where you've got to shoot through their defense to get to them inside of their big spaceship. But that's what makes this game good. And especially if you're playing on something like the Atari 2600, this captures the feel of it very well. They've done a great job at converting this to the Atari 2600. This game plays superb. You know, I really wanted to protect all my bases and stuff. They've got the amount of pace for your little cursor to go around the screen just perfect. You can zigzag around in plenty of time to get everything. So there you go. Lots of intense action, trying to save the world from nuclear annihilation. Great controls. What more could you want? Here we go. All right, so here we have Gravatar, and Gravatar, oh my goodness, what a difficult game. I think the arcade is easier to handle because there's buttons for thrusters and stuff. You're not just using one joystick, so you can thrust easier and move left and right at the same time. But this game is difficult, and not in the worst way. You've got to go to one of the lands, and the goal is to clear all the planets or lands, whatever you want to call them. This is one that I could see sinking a lot of time in and literally pulling your hair out, but wanting to play more. All right, we got Moon Patrol. Here's proof. If you ever wondered if we were on the moon, I mean, does this not prove it? I mean, look, here we are. We're on the moon. Evident. Look, there's craters. There's rocks. This game actually, to me, is more fun on the Atari. I don't know why. Again, maybe it's just because it's at home, and it was just really fun. I was surprised because I was thinking about like Moon Patrol. There's a good challenge with the throwing rocks at you and throwing different potholes or craters at you, and then the aliens, and like again, you only got like about a quarter of the screen where you can zip back and forth, so you got to be really careful. Another game that I'm having a lot of fun with, and I'd recommend if you can get it for a good price. All right, now we're on to one of the big games of Nintendo's early era, and that's Popeye. Popeye is pretty good. The pace is a little slow because it takes so long to collect all the hearts and the music notes, but they did a good job. They did a real good job on this. You know, you don't see the sea hag, but the bottles come out at you. Bluto throws out bottles. The hearts and stuff move. You got all 3 levels. What more can you ask from a port? So this is one of the higher quality arcade ports you're going to find on an Atari 2600. Here we go, everybody. Miss Pac-Man, the Redeemer. This was such an improvement on Pac-Man. I was really psyched when this came out, and it was such a good conversion. All the levels are here. They're not arcade perfect, but they're really close enough to make anybody that's a fan of Miss Pac-Man happy. This is a must-have in the Atari 2600 catalog of arcade conversions. All right, let's make this short and sweet, or maybe short and incredibly bitter, because here's a prototype of Tempest. You need to avoid this at all costs.
And what are your feelings about that, Mr. Horse?
No, sir, I don't like it.
Here we are next, Mr. Do. Mr. Do, this is another one where what they were able to do was pretty good, and there's lots of levels on this, so it makes it really fun. Honestly, if you wanted to play Mr. Do at home, this was pretty good, and even though it was a little more challenging, I think it holds up pretty well considering the limitations of the system. Here's basketball. There was an arcade version of this which looked much better. The graphics are crappy. The basketball hoops are horrible. The physics of the ball are crazy. I think this was a late 70s one because I think it's one of the early games. So there we go. That's basketball. An arcade clone, if you can hear me putting up those air quotes. All right, here we have Mario Brothers. They've got everything in here pretty much. They've got the ice guys that freeze your areas. They got the hopping character, the crabs, all that stuff. So I found this is a really good port. The only problem with this for me is you only have enemies on one platform at a time. They can't cohabitate, and that's probably because of the potential for 2-player and also to have the coins move around freely. So if you flip an enemy on one level, the other enemy's not going to drop yet. But, that's a pretty small issue considering what they were able to do to create a port, because I think this Mario looks much better than the one in Donkey Kong. So, another one. All right, so now we have pole position. It handled really well, even with a joystick, so I was very pleased. And I'm not sure if they could get away with it on the paddle because you push up and down to go into low and high gear. It took me a moment to figure that out or remember how to do that. And, it looks pretty good. It's I mean, we got to remember this is an Atari 2600. It's only got so much in the graphic capabilities, you know, and it's really impressive what they were able to do. Here we have Ladybug, and this isn't Ladybug Arcade because they've even improved on this more to make it more just like the arcade. But this is Ladybug, the first rendition they made of a port, which feels more like an Atari game that could have been because it's not an exact port of the game. So I really enjoy this game. This is one of my favorite games, and this is not a well-known game. And it was never released for the Atari. It was released for the ColecoVision, and some people might remember it from there. But it's not an arcade game that a lot of people, I think, know about. And Ladybug, while not an original Atari game back from the 80s, I just wanted to throw this one in as a little bonus so people could see how impressive the makers of modern ports are for even a system like the Atari 2600.